Welcome to the surveillance pricing panel. My name is Sasha Sloan. I'm a correspondent at the Capital Forum, and I cover corporate power in technology markets from computer chips to AI. And I am really excited to moderate this panel on surveillance pricing. We have a fantastic group of experts. First, we have Hannah Garden-Monheit, who is a senior fellow at the American Economic Liberties Project. During the Biden administration, Hannah served as director of the Office of Policy Planning at the FTC, and before that worked in the National Economic Council. We have Sam Levine, who served as director of the FTC's Bureau of Consumer Protection, where he oversaw enforcement and policy work across the digital economy. We have Javier Mabry, who's a Colorado state representative for House District 1, which encompasses Denver's southwestern neighborhoods, and he was elected in November 2022. He also serves as the chair of the House Judiciary Committee in the Colorado House and has sponsored bills addressing surveillance pricing and algorithmic collusion. And we have Brad Weber, who co-leads the Troutman Pepper Locke's antitrust practice. And Brad represents clients across industries in class action and government antitrust investigations, lawsuits, and merger reviews. So to start, I was hoping we could kind of just set the stage and figure out what we're even really talking about when we talk about surveillance pricing. What is actually going on out there? And can we get some examples, hopefully? So, Hannah, I was hoping to start with you to kind of talk about, like, actually what is happening.
Sure. So at a basic level, what we're talking about is the use of your personal data, so data about an individual, to set or offer a price to you based on that personal data. And this is something that, at the FTC, we were starting to see concerns about. And so we initiated, under Chair Khan, a 6B study. We used compulsory process to get information from some of the firms that are offering these tools to companies to try to start getting a handle on what are they, how are they being used, because this area is like almost definitionally extraordinarily opaque, right? And by design. And so we issued orders to a number of companies that were offering these tools publicly and found that there were basically three categories of tools that they were using. So price or offering to their clients. Price targeting tools where they're determining prices based on that personal data. Customer segmentation or profiling tools where they're using your personal data to profile customers and identify a class of people to offer a particular price or perhaps in some cases discount to. And then also product sort of page ranking tools, which was actually a category we weren't sort of surprised us. It wasn't one that we had thought of going into it, as the staff says in their public report on this. But these are tools that adjust what you're shown in search results, how it is ranked based on your personal data, which can have the same kind of effect as changing the price for you, because based on your data you might be shown higher priced items right at the top of your search results, for example, and maybe you never make it to the third page where the lower price is available. And we saw from these companies, I think we went to eight companies that we issued orders to, and we asked them to provide their customer lists of who are their clients. And what we saw was that they had, I think it was over 200 clients, really, really broad range of types of products and services. So we saw grocers that were their clients. We saw home goods, home furniture companies, beauty and health retailers, convenience stores, all different manner. And we could also see that the way that these companies were talking about the services that they provide was that these were tools for increasing your revenue, increasing your margins. We also saw more recently, folks probably saw in the news, a company called Fletcher Fetcher was working with Delta. Delta got into some hot water about bragging to their shareholders that they were going to be engaging in personalized pricing. And that company Fetcher, if you look at their corporate presentation, they would say, they literally said that this tool was to find the exploitation phase in pricing. So, you sometimes hear these arguments about, oh, we're really doing this because it's overall efficiency enhancing, we're customizing the price so that, the wealthier consumers cross-subsidize less wealthy consumers who are getting discounts. But when you start looking at what the companies are saying, and personally, I, am of the view that when somebody tells you what they're doing, just believe them. What they say they are doing is looking for this pain point of individual consumers to figure out how far out can we push prices. And then we also, have a lot of concerns about, so that, there's sort of a concern about the basic functioning of markets when you have that happening. There are also versions of this that have a more sort of, to use a technical term, ick factor, right? A kind of moral feeling to them. So imagine a world in which, the company knows that there's been a death in your family, right? And you need to buy a plane ticket, and then the price that you see for airfare is higher because they know that you're in a jam, or maybe you have a health condition. And so they're all know your bank data, for example, know exactly how much money you have on hand that you could pay for something. So that's sort of at a high level lay of the land.
Great, thank you. Javier, I was hoping we could turn to you next. Could you kind of talk about what the current legal and legislative landscape is around surveillance pricing, and maybe a bit about where your bill, where you were kind of seeking to intervene in that landscape?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So this is something that when I talk about it with voters or in a town hall, people are absolutely shocked that this is allowed. I will also note that voters are absolutely shocked that we tried to run a bill last year and that it died. And the reason that it died wasn't actually Republican members of the legislature. It was two Democrats that were the reason why the bill failed. But the reason why we wanted to step up in the state of Colorado and do something on this is I have very little faith in the institution of the United States Congress to step in and provide any meaningful protections for consumers anytime soon. And I believe that existing avenues to crack down on this sort of behavior are complicated. I mean, I've seen great writing from Zephyr Teach Out, an organization based in Colorado called Towards Justice. They put out a whole report talking about how this sort of behavior potentially violates existing antitrust law, right? Potentially the way this information is being used and the way this information is being gathered by people who, or by companies that have such a big share of the market. It could violate antitrust laws by being collusion. But enforcement there is incredibly tough, and of course we no longer have consumer-friendly cops on the beat at the FTC and the CFPB. And so if we're going to do anything to protect people in Colorado, we need to do it at the state level, which is why I brought a bill to just ban this. Our legislation this year said that you cannot use surveillance data to set pricing. It didn't pass. I'm aware other states are going down this route. California had a bill that actually recently failed as well. But I don't think there's anything that has passed. New York is looking at something that is about transparency.
It passed.
And it did pass?
It passed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, excellent. Brad, I was hoping to go to you next and get some insight into how companies are thinking about complying with the maybe small bit of legislation that is out there, or if any of this would be companies could be liable under existing law, and really just how companies are thinking about putting these tools into practice now while complying with the law.
Sure, thank you. So I work with clients a lot of them are using AI now through chatbots or various tools that they use on their websites. And so I'm getting lots of questions about this patchwork of state laws that govern AI and data privacy. And it's very challenging. Even large companies that have large compliance groups and legal departments, they're overwhelmed by just the number of bills that are being introduced and the number of different regulations that govern data privacy and AI. And I kind of view this as a subset of that, the surveillance pricing, because at its root, it relies on personal data that companies are collecting through browsing patterns or geographic location, credit scores. And so, yeah, it's something that companies are very concerned about it. I get many questions from clients of our firm about, can you help us with these issues? And I think it's just going to continue because I think over 20 states now have various data privacy laws that somehow implicate surveillance pricing.
Great. Awesome. So now I'd love to get to what I see as kind of the real meat of the issue, which is like setting aside whether this is happening or not. It seems like it is happening. How do we kind of, through legislation or litigation or any other means, isolate the potential benefits, whether they're ostensible discounts or other benefits, and excise the bad parts? And Sam, I'd love to turn to you for this. And like, how should we think about these kind of ostensible benefits, and what are the kind of narratives forming around them?
So I'll answer a slightly different question, and I just want to follow up on what Brad said, because I think the current legal landscape around surveillance pricing, I'm glad companies are paying attention. I'm not sure all of us in the policy space are paying enough attention to this, and I think it's worth going over what some of the, just a sample of the existing legal frameworks that I think should be governing these practices, and then I'll get into discounting briefly. So first, I agree, I think of this as a data issue as much as it is a output issue. On the data side, you have to think about state data minimization requirements in terms of what companies are collecting. You have to think about, are companies using deception to collect this data? Are they using dark patterns? You have to think about, most states have laws, I call them fake discount laws, where if you're telling a consumer you're going to give them a discount in exchange for their data, that needs to be a real discount under both FTC guidance and consumer protection laws in many states. It needs to be a discount off of a reference price that people actually pay. So if you're saying you're going to get 20% off, but no one's actually paying the full price, that is deceptive, and I believe under every state law and under FTC guidance. If you're a company purchasing data from others, which our study showed is common, you have to think about states like California that have deletion laws, which there's now investigative reporting suggesting data brokers are not honoring deletion requests. But if you're purchasing data from a broker, make sure that broker's honoring deletion requests. One of the things we pioneered at the FTC under Chair Khan was finding that it was an unfair, or generally an unfair practice, for data brokers to not data brokers that themselves did not collect data but that got data from others, did they verify that the first party collector had valid consent? And I would apply the same thing to retailers. If retailers are purchasing data, they have a responsibility to ensure that data was obtained through valid consent. Sharing data with pricing consultants carries additional legal risks. Many consumers opt out of sharing. I believe every state privacy law allows consumers to opt out of the sale or the sharing of their data, with some exceptions. There are also minimization requirements around sharing. Data sharing, especially sensitive data, can be unfair. That's been a whole host of FTC cases over the last 4 years. It can be deception. It can be deceptive if companies aren't telling people how their data is being shared. And of course, as Hannah alluded to as well, there are antitrust implications. And then finally, and then I'll get to discounts, I think the use of this data to set prices carries its own legal implications. This, I think, has gotten the most attention. Obviously, there's civil rights dimensions. Many states have laws that you need to sell. If you advertise multiple prices, you need to charge the lowest advertised price. California has a law like that. Some municipalities have a law like that. If companies are advertising that, this has not been tested, but I think companies should be paying attention to it. And finally, again, if companies are making claims, people are getting discounts, those claims have to be substantiated. So there's a lot of legal risk out there for companies that want to engage in these practices, and the fact that they still want to do so and are signing up to all these high-priced consultants indicates, I think, just how profitable this business model is. Very quickly on discounting, because my sense, and I'd love to hear from Javier on this, but I worked a little on the legislation in California. The biggest line of attack on surveillance pricing legislation is that it prohibits discounting. And this is it's misinformation. So I want to make 3 points. The first is that all of these bills, including yours, I believe, carved out discounting. The second is that what I would say innocuous forms of discounts, senior discounts, student discounts, military discounts, not only aren't threatened by these laws, not only are expressly protected by these laws, but it's surveillance pricing itself, I think, that poses the biggest threat to these forms of discounting. Surveillance pricing is about precise price discrimination. Senior discounts, student discounts, military discounts, these are, we all know, these are crude forms of price discrimination. If companies move toward more granular discrimination, you are going to see the end of group-based discounts and a move. So the biggest threat to senior discounts is not Javier's legislation, it's the absence of such legislation. And the third point I would just make quickly on discounting is I don't think all discounting is as innocuous as senior discounts. You're seeing, often because state privacy laws carve out loyalty programs, or they have special carve-outs for loyalty programs, you're seeing a lot of companies push people into loyalty programs and condition discounts on turning over a lot of data. Consumer Reports did a really eye-opening study of Kroger's discounting program, where Kroger built a 62-page dossier on a single consumer. Most of it was wrong, predicting their gender, their income. It deemed this consumer non-loyal and denied this consumer the best discounts because they were deemed non-loyal. I do think, as we consider future surveillance pricing legislation, I personally would not support a broad carve-out for discounting. I do think we need to actually examine the data collection and use practices that are going into these loyalty programs, because I really feel that these loyalty programs where companies are already experimenting with targeted prices, this is the Trojan horse for surveillance pricing.
Great. Yeah. Does anyone else want to talk? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to follow up on this point because, as this legislation moved forward in the process, companies kept coming out of the woodwork and registering on the Colorado Secretary of State website that they were lobbying against the bill. At one point, Chick-fil-A was lobbying against the bill, which I thought was hilarious. But, the idea that companies who ultimately have a fiduciary duty to generate profits for their shareholders are using this technology and hiring firms like Fetcher to provide discounts to consumers or somehow be good citizens or altruistic is absolutely ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. That is not their incentive. Their incentive to use these tools is to find the pain points to charge us as much as possible. And they have a fiduciary duty, actually, to do that. If they want to provide a discount, they can just provide a discount. Nothing in this law prevented them from providing a discount. The other thing I'll say is, if anybody bought anything online this week, anytime you go to almost any company's website, it says, blowout sale. Everything in the store is 40% off. Well, if everything is always discounted, what actually is a discount? We're living in a world where companies, through marketing techniques, can convince us on days like Black Friday that a TV costs $350 and that's 70% off, when if you bought it in July, you would have found that actually wasn't 70% off, right? We need to figure out what the actual price of an individualized product is. And in a world where prices are being set based on individualized information, is it even possible to define what a discount really is?
Can I pick up on that? I think beyond the discounting context, we should be worried about what this does to the meaning of price full stop, right? In the last panel, folks talked about, the market clearing function of prices. But how does a market function? How is the price a signal of supply and demand in a world in which there is no one price, or there is no publicly available set of prices? If you have a near infinite a number of prices that are offered to individuals, how is that price going to be used as a signal of supply and demand? And this is something that we've talked a lot about, the consumer perspective, but small and mid-sized businesses should be worried about this too, right? Like, they don't have as much access to the types of data platforms and resources to engage in this kind of very fine-toothed price discrimination. And it's also, a form of pricing that really eliminates the ability to comparison shop, right? We see there are some, emergence of some tools where you go to a website and it helps you understand, is this the right time to buy on Amazon or not? So, in theory, companies and consumers could build all of these equally complex monitoring tools to assess what is the current market price for something and how do I respond to that. But now we've got an economy where we're just building up these huge amounts of very energy consuming, in both the literal and figurative sense, by the way, tools for sussing out what each other are doing. But none of that is a market that is functioning based on how do we allocate capital to its most efficient and best use, right? None of that is about creating value in the real economy. It's just about using your personal data to extract to the maximum extent possible.
One thing I just want to add to that, because your point really illustrated the fact that we're no longer living in an economy where companies are competing with each other by providing us better products, right? Like, they're competing with each other to figure out ways to rig the market to generate more profits for their shareholders. They're not focused on, providing us the best quality flight across the country anymore, when they can use schemes like this to primarily drive how they're making money.
One thing I wanted to mention is I feel like dynamic pricing, which doesn't necessarily rely on personal data, but dynamic pricing can have pro-competitive benefits. To give you an example, Uber, their surge pricing fluctuates by the minute, and a lot of times it's geared to demand. If there's more people needing a ride in a certain location, the prices go up to attract more drivers to that area. Another example, I have season baseball tickets for the Texas Rangers, and a lot of times I can't use those tickets, but I can list them on SeatGeek, and they have a dynamic pricing tool where it will adjust the prices in respect to demand, so I don't end up with unused tickets. It may not be what I paid for, it usually is not, but at least it's adjusting the price to meet demand. And so that's an example of an algorithmic pricing tool that I think has a pro-competitive benefit.
Yeah, well, so could you talk a little bit more about kind of the relationship between dynamic pricing and surveillance pricing? And
my view is surveillance pricing is sort of a subset of dynamic pricing. So you've got this big circle of algorithmic pricing that the first panel talked about. Then you have dynamic pricing, which can react very quickly to changes in market conditions. And then surveillance pricing is yet another subset, which the variables that are used in the algorithm include personal data. And I do see concerns when you get down to that smaller subset of using personal data, but my view that dynamic pricing, if it's really looking at supply and demand factors, is a good thing.
yeah, does anyone want to respond to?
Very challenging to know which one of those things is happening. So, like the Uber example, right? There have been experiments where two drivers sit in the same room and they're offered different fares for a ride at roughly the exact same time, right? So that's clearly not just surge pricing, but we're moving to a world in which it's impossible to tell what is going on. And in fact, these companies, as we move towards a world of AI, they're not themselves going to know what is the algorithm using to set this price.
I'll also just add that there are other examples like Kaplan setting different prices in zip codes that were more heavily Asian for college prep classes. There's an example of a hotel charging different prices if they knew you lived in San Francisco versus Omaha, Nebraska. And so I will echo that it's hard to track down exactly what's going on here. But I will totally agree with Brad that if all that's happening is it being a microcosm of supply and demand, I think that's something that consumers generally accept. I think all of us, when we fly to Washington, D.C. and it's the 4th of July or whatever, understand that, demand's higher, there are fewer tickets. If that's really what's happening, I think that's something that people are ready to accept. But we are living in a world where A, it's hard to track that down, and then B, I also just want to emphasize how over the past 50 years or so, consolidation and market power being in the hands of fewer and fewer companies. I mean, now it feels like there are about 6 airlines that we can buy tickets from, and that also severely negatively impacts the ability of true supply and demand to influence how much we're paying.
I'll just pick up on that briefly. Stipulate for purposes of discussion only that dynamic pricing yields some efficiencies, however you want to define that. I don't think we want to live in a world like shopping for an airline ticket. I led consumer protection at the FTC. It's a stressful experience for sophisticated consumers even. You are constantly trying to game, am I using the right browser? Am I logging on at the right time? Am I in incognito mode? Am I, but right, I mean, it's crazy. And now, and Hannah alluded to this, one of the things we did at the FTC was try to make subscriptions easier to cancel. That problem got so bad, now you're developing, they have apps you subscribe to try to manage your subscriptions. And Hannah's describing the same kind of arms race, where soon you're going to have agentic AI apps to try to manage dynamic pricing or surveillance pricing. And it's just going to be an arms race, by the way, one that consumers will never win. Because a consumer is not going to win an arms race against Target or Home Depot or Walmart. And I worry about living in a world where we don't have a single advertised price. I worry for families who are trying to set a grocery budget. I worry for competitors who actually care about price signals, and that's how the market has long functioned. I worry we'll go back to a period of 150 years ago. Putting labels on goods is a Wanamaker, I think is his name, a relatively recent development, fundamental to our development of our market economy over the last 130, 140 years. I really worry about a world where you no longer have an advertised price and what that means for consumers and competition and the ability to comparison shop and to manage a family budget. So, even if there are efficiencies, and I think that's contestable, I think we also need to think about the broader picture of what kind of market we want to live in.
I wouldn't just assume that dynamic pricing, it's over here and it's totally fine, right? Like we saw the reaction to Wendy's, right? Like that's a form of dynamic pricing if you're like, your burger costs more at lunchtime. And yet there was a vast outcry that it, again, to use my technical term, was icky. Similarly, right, we have most states have laws where in the wake of a natural disaster, you can't suddenly price gouge people on water or gasoline, right? Like you could think of that as a form of dynamic pricing. Oh, there's a shortage of water in this area that was hit by a hurricane, but we still, as a society, right, we have values about fair access to goods and services that limits that.
Yeah, awesome. It really seems like there's interesting debate going on about even beyond surveillance pricing, like what do we think about dynamic pricing and what it says about the role of prices in the economy. And so I'd love to continue talking about that, but maybe shift a little more concretely to the actual legislative approaches that legislators are taking with respect to surveillance pricing. And specifically, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on what this legislation should actually look like. So we have the New York example of a disclosure transparency requirement that has faced a First Amendment legal challenge that I would love to get into. Then we might have a sort of opt-out style approach where consumers can theoretically choose not to participate in surveillance pricing, or the final approach being just like a ban on certain kinds of surveillance pricing, or just surveillance pricing in general. So I was hoping you could all talk about what each approach actually looks like and what the drawbacks or benefits might be of each, starting with Brad.
Sure. So my understanding on the New York law is that originally it was intended to be a ban, but now it's more of just a disclosure law. Frankly, I'm trying to think of how that benefits. You know that you're using, or that the company you're dealing with is using your personal data to set prices, but unless there's some way to opt out, the fact that it's being disclosed, to me, it doesn't really have teeth to the law. The bill that Javier introduced went a lot further than that, so maybe you're probably the better person to talk about how the Colorado bill, if it had been passed, would have been facilitated.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually really appreciate the first point you made, because it's how I wanted to break down talking about this. So I actually believe that all of the approaches, I haven't had individual conversations with every single legislator that has worked in this space. I have had a lot of conversations with legislators in other states who have been working on this policy. But my theory here is that all of them actually wanted to ban this practice, and that the power of the corporate lobby in their states led them to water down the legislation so that it could continue through the process. They probably reached some committee like we did, where the vote count wasn't great, and to get some, local state version of the Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema on board, they essentially had to got the main intent of what they were trying to do. That is something we run into all the time, and I think it's actually also reflective of the health of our democracy. Because again, when I go out and talk about this issue to voters, I don't think that any of them would be able to do the mental gymnastics of the Democrats who run in safe seats saying they're going to fight for consumers and workers, and then say, hey, well, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe the wealthiest companies in the world are using this technology and spending all sorts of money researching how to use it to provide us discounts. Just want to highlight that those dynamics, I think, are what lead to the different approaches. I don't think the transparency approach is worth much at all. And I think a lot of the reason why is because of, again, going back to monopoly power, and how increasingly fewer and fewer decision makers are influencing what we're paying for airline tickets. And so, the fact that that Delta uses surveillance pricing to set your prices, okay, great, I'm going to use United. Is United that much cheaper than Delta? And then on top of that, how does Delta even really separate out setting a price? If then we're checking the next box and it's an opt-out, how does Delta then really separate out? All right, well, this is the standard set price without any sort of personalized data going into it. It seems like their business model is far detached from that reality in the first place. So I don't even really get how the opt-out would work on the consumer-facing side. All of this is why my approach was, let's just ban this. Let's just ban it. Let's just say you cannot set prices based on individualized private data that you collect from people. I'm old enough to remember a time, 2005, in the wake of the passage of the Patriot Act, everyday people were outraged at the amount of information the federal government was collecting about us in the war on terror. Why are we not equally upset that companies are collecting that same data? They are literally collecting our Google search history, which, by the way, to me, not to be super existential, but these phones have reached a place where they are our brains. When we have thoughts, we put them into here. Companies are literally in our brains and collecting our thoughts to decide what prices they're going to charge us. That's crazy. It's crazy. It sounds like RoboCop shit. But that's the world that we live in. That's the world that we live in. And so I think the best way to do this is to just ban that. I think companies were posting record profits before they were able to do this. Sort of similar to a lot of the AI regulation conversations that we have. I'm involved in some of those. Maybe we'll be on a panel about that next year. But when we talk about regulating AI, people are like, well, we use this for everything. We use this for hiring people. We use this for deciding who gets housing. What did you do in 2023? You know, like, companies are acting like they can't make a decision without AI. In 2023, we were doing fine. And so, I think I went beyond the scope of the question.
No. Thank you. Yeah, Sam, you want it?
Yeah, so I agree with the group on transparency. I spent much of the last 4 years and anywhere I could going after notice and choice in the privacy context. It makes no more sense in this context. The one thing I will say for the New York law, I think it's important researchers be able to open this black box that Hannah was describing at the top of the session, and I think the transparency law could be good for that. And by the way, I think it's telling how hard the National Retail Federation and their allies are fighting that law. They say this is a phantom menace. They say it's not happening. They say to the extent it's happening, it's all cool and just discounts for people. Then they should have no problem disclosing that they're doing it, but instead they're in federal court saying it violates their First Amendment rights. With respect to the legislation that Javier advanced in Colorado, that Senator Ward advanced in, or something. Chris Ward advanced in California, and there's some federal bills too. I think that's the right approach. I would respectfully suggest two maybe amendments or things to think about in these pieces of legislation. One, and this is, I very much agree with Hannah, I think there should be a requirement that you advertise a price. Like, I think companies should have to advertise a price available to all consumers. You can think about reasonable geographical restrictions on that and such, but I think it's important that that be required under the law. And I also think that sort of a carte blanche approach to discounts and loyalty programs is going to get us in trouble. I really don't want a world, and actually we are in this world, where, as I said at the top, where grocery stores charge an arm and a leg, and often, I think, an artificially high price, and the only way to access discounts is if you agree to turn over all of your data. And as Kroger does, sell it to brokers, sell it to tobacco companies, build profiles of you. This is something that is already happening in the here and now. So I would argue that, yes, we want to permit discounting. I think that's a reasonable use of certain types of consumer data, but I think there should be more attention paid, both under state privacy laws and in surveillance pricing legislation, to what data companies can lawfully collect to administer discounts. You know, Home Depot, for example, is using people's session replay software. They are monitoring people's interaction with their website as part of the loyalty program. Why is that necessary? I think state enforcers should be scrutinizing that.
Unsurprisingly, I want to associate myself with all of that. Agree with everything that folks have said thus far. I'll just add two further thoughts. So, one, if transparency is a step towards learning more about what's going on so that we can take enforcement action or enact better policies, great. But it can't be an end in itself, and we should really, I think, policymakers need to be concerned about this moment that we are in about trust in government more generally and our capacity to solve problems. And, when you see something that is taking advantage of people, and your policy solution is, let me tell you more information about how you are being taken advantage of, but then you don't actually stop it, That fundamentally undermines citizens' trust that their institutions are capable of standing up for them. So that's one point, and a reason why I think bans are the way to go here, functionally a ban if you require an advertised price. Another thing is that I think we need to be thinking more broadly too about the mass collection of data in our society, right? One of my biggest regrets from our time in the administration is that we didn't succeed in passing comprehensive data minimization laws in this country. Surveillance pricing is the latest pernicious symptom of an economy in which companies are amassing huge amounts of data to understand our innermost thoughts and wishes and desires and manipulate us with it. But it's certainly not the only one, right? Our political discourse and our culture is being completely torn apart by the use of our personal data to maximize our attention as an asset to companies that engage in digital advertising, right? And so, in an ideal world in which we had functional policymaking institutions, we would go upstream and we would address the collection of data in the first place.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It does really seem like surveillance pricing is a downstream manifestation of maybe a lot of problems we're dealing with in the economy. I would love to, in the last bit of the panel, open it up to questions. If anybody wants any of the panelists to elaborate on anything, or if there was any questions anybody had. If not, I have some questions.
Here's one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hannah, you briefly mentioned something about the Uber drivers receiving different fares for the same ride. So I'm curious how some of the proposed legislation would take into account surveillance wages as opposed to surveillance prices. Would those be considered the same thing under the proposed legislation?
Yeah, so I think at the federal level, there's a CASAR bill that addresses surveillance wages as well. At the state level, I think the two have traveled more. You're in a much better position to talk about.
Yeah, thank you. So the legislation that I ran covered both. It treated them differently. There were different sections of the bill, but also surveillance wage setting was banned. And this was really an interesting part of the conversation because in presenting the bill, I had talked about, I think it's more perfect. Some journalistic organization did a test where they got 10 Uber drivers in a room, and they all, on your app, you can kind of generally say where you're going. And I think their goal was to say, all right, we all want to get rides generally from the area that we're in right now to the airport, for example. And what they found was, controlling for distance, time, etc., people were being paid differently. And the inference there, and I don't know if the FTC or the CFPB actually looked into this, but the inference there was that maybe they were taking into consideration that certain people were immigrants, or maybe, and we know they have the power to take into consideration, what if you Google, you need some sort of a car repair or something like that. They might know that you're more desperate for money and then be able to charge you less. And what was interesting is after we had this part of the conversation, immediately, as soon as I walked out, Uber's lobbyists were all over me, and they were like, we need to set up a meeting ASAP. And, we had a meeting with them, and good news. They're not doing this. Case closed. I fully trust them. No. But that's what they really stressed. Hey, there's nothing to look into here. We promise. To which my response would be, then why are you opposed to us banning this? Then what's the problem? You should just support the bill then. Support the bill. Come to our press conference.
Yeah.
By the way, companies like Uber now are started. I don't want to name them in particular because I don't remember which rideshare company it is, but probably Uber, are setting up ancillary lines of business like lending and cash advance. And the notion that they don't need to look far to try to predict consumers or a worker's desperation to work and earn money, they're going to get direct data on whether a driver is desperately in need of a fare.
Great. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, isn't this, Tom Wilcox, by the way, solo practitioner in DC, isn't the largest concern if this software becomes leaks between the companies, then it's very difficult to get a different price if they're all using the same tools to set your price. In other words, you can't go, they're all using to set the same price.
I mean,
There's no level of difficulty.
Yeah, I'd be interested in what Hannah and Sam think about this, but my initial reaction is that's sort of what I was getting at when I was like, I already think there's antitrust collusion, antitrust violation, specifically potentially collusion, that is in effect happening here, because to your point, like fewer and fewer price setters are using this technology that is increasingly sophisticated, and if it's using the same information, are we effectively circumventing protections that we have in place to prevent collusion? I'm curious what you all think on that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, it takes us back to the subject of the first panel, right? That courts are really struggling and kind of circling around what is the framework going to be for that form of giving up your independent pricing centers of decision making.
One thing I'll add, I was in the RealPage case with Ken. I represented a different defendant, and our client settled out. But I know with RealPage, different property management companies use the tool differently. For example, we've got a client who is a multifamily property developer, and their incentive was to fill up the property and then sell it. And so they had a different motivation than a typical multifamily property operator who might want to focus more on maximizing profits. And so not all users of the same algorithm or the same pricing tool have the same business motivation. And I think it's risky to generalize that everyone's using it in the same way.
Great. Well, I think we have to wrap it up, but thank you so much to all our panelists, and thanks for the excellent questions.